Thank you for purchasing the ETSPIL Embroidery Kit. Now let's move on. Let's take a look at what's included in this kit. First, here's the cover of the kit. Let's take a look. This is a guide on threading and floss separation. This is an instruction on how to assemble the embroidery hoop. This is a description of the needles and the corresponding strand count. Most importantly, here's how to access the video tutorial. We can search for ETSPIL on YouTube. Add a product number to it. Then you'll be able to access our video tutorial. This is an embroidery hoop. The embroidery hoop has 2 rings. And next, we'll show you how to use this embroidery hoop. This is a toolkit. Inside, there is a pack of needles. The needle matches the description on the back of the kit. Let's open it and take a look. Now let's open it. It looks exactly the same as the description. How to use it? Here are 3 different sizes of needles. This is needle number 3. This is needle number 2. There are 8 needles of size number 1, labeled 1, 2, and 3. So, when we use them, each corresponds to a specific number of strands. Needle number 1 is for 1 to 2 strands. Needle number 2 is for 3 to 4 strands. Needle number 3 is for 5 to 6 strands. So, when we use them, we can refer to this chart here, because in the manual, there is no mention of the strand count. But here, it is provided. When preparing to work, it's important to understand the strand count and needle selection. If we make a mistake while embroidering, we can use this small tool to remove the stitches more easily. Let's take a look at how to use it. Simply lift it gently like this. If you stitch the wrong color, or are not satisfied with your work, then in this case, you can use this small tool to remove the stitches effortlessly. This is how to use the seam ripper. This is its protective cover. This is the seam ripper in use. This is a threader. These 2 are both threaders. How do we use them? This one is generally used for 1 to 2 strands. It is not recommended to use it for 3 to 6 strands. As for this one, it's better for 3 to 6 strands. So they are used together. Both of these are included in the kit. Now let's take a look at the other items. These are the more important ones. The fabric pieces. There are 3 pieces of fabric in total. Here's the first one. Here's the second one. And here's the third one. 1, 2, 3. These are the 3 pieces of fabric. And this is the corresponding instruction manual. The second and third pieces have 3 different manuals. Now I will teach you how to read the manual. This section below is a color code guide. There are 10 colors in total. This is the embroidery floss. The colors of the floss you receive correspond to those in the instructions. Now let's take an example to see how to read the manual. For instance, let's look at this section here. It indicates that you should use 2 strands, and the color is number 6. Number 6 refers to this color. The stitch type is shown in the row above. It says Fishbone Stitch. Let's look at color number 6 here. The number of strands is 2. This number of strands is written first, followed by the color number 6. So, the corresponding color is this one here. The color code is 3863. Then we find this color in the floss. This is the color. This corresponds to this color here. Before we start embroidering, how should we organize these embroidery floss? Now I will teach you a few methods. The first method is the wooden stick organizing method. Let's use color 3863 as an example. How do we organize this floss before embroidering? Because before embroidering, we need to do some preparation work. We prepare something like this, such as a small wooden stick, or these floss bobbins, or even DIY ones. You can also use thread cards like this. Now I will show you how to organize this floss. First, do not throw away the color label. We need to find the end of the floss. Place it here and secure it. Then, make sure the color label is exposed here. This way, we know which color corresponds to this label. Then, wind it onto the wooden stick. Let's take a look. This is the floss that has been wound. At the end, we can secure it like this. The floss can be clipped here. This way, we've organized one color. Now let's look at other methods. If we don't have these two tools, or if none of the three tools are available, what should we do? How can we organize the floss? Now I'll teach you. An even simpler and more practical method. All right, we can find a piece of paper, a slightly thicker piece of cardboard. Then we cut it into a size roughly like an eraser. Cut an opening like this. This method doesn't require any tools to use. Remember not to throw away the color label. Keep it. Find one end of the floss. Secure one end of the floss first. Clip it into this slot. Secure it here. Then we can start winding the floss. Just wind it like this. The method is the same. This is how we organize the floss. Now we've created the simplest version of a floss bobbin. It's just like a regular floss bobbin. Once we organize all the colors, we're ready to start embroidering. All right, now I'll show you how to use this paper floss bobbin to organize the embroidery floss. First, we take a bundle of floss. It has a color label on it. Take it out and set it aside. After taking it out, unwind the floss. Then find both ends of the floss. Align the two ends of the floss. After aligning them, separate the strands like this. Once organized, fold the entire floss in half. After folding it in half once, fold it in half a second time. Now it becomes 4 strands. Then fold it in half one more time. Fold it 3 times in total. It should be about this length. Let's take a look. All right, this length is good. The length is approximately 1 meter, 40 inches. Then cut one end of the folded floss. Do the same and cut the other end. After cutting both ends, align the floss. After aligning them, let's take a look at this color. We were looking at color number 9 earlier. Here it says number 9. Now thread it through here. Open it, find the 9th hole, and pull it through. Pull it through like this. Now it's threaded. Place it securely on this floss card. Then we organize all the floss using this method. Match the colors with those listed in the manual. Gather all the colors here. Follow this method for all the colors. And make sure to write down the color numbers. We need to write the color numbers in order. We will also write down the color numbers together. Write them down in sequence, up to the 10th color. This is a complete method for organizing embroidery floss with floss cards. Let's take a look. Here are 4 methods. There's this kind of floss bobbin. This one is DIY. Made with cardboard as a DIY floss bobbin. There's also this kind made with wooden sticks. Or card-style ones like this. Card-style ones can also be used. Any method is fine. Before starting embroidery, we need to organize the floss. Once the floss is organized, we can start embroidering. Next, I'll teach you how to assemble the embroidery hoop. If the screw is difficult to tighten, we can use a screwdriver to help. This will make it easier to unscrew it. Then we remove the inner and outer rings. Place the inner ring on the table. Then place the fabric flat on the inner ring. The fabric we receive may have creases. These creases are not an issue. Once it is stretched tightly, the creases will disappear. So we don't need to worry about this. Like this, after placing it on, we need to adjust it. This way won't work. We need to adjust it first. Make some slight adjustments. Align this part with the center. Position the design in the center of the hoop. If everything looks fine, use your left hand to hold the nut in place, and use your right hand to turn the screw. Tighten it slightly. When it is mostly tightened, adjust the tension of the fabric. Finally, use a screwdriver to tighten the hoop. This will make it more secure. You can press on the fabric. If it doesn't bounce back too much, it means the hoop is properly installed. A slight bounce is fine. Now we can get started. Here, I'll demonstrate. We'll place it on an embroidery stand. But when embroidering yourself, you generally don't need a stand. Let's compare the 2 results. This is before embroidery. This is the finished embroidery effect. Next, I'll teach you each stitch and show you how to complete this piece. Now, I'll teach you how to use the threader. We'll use this threader to pass through the needle. After threading the needle, we'll pass the floss through the threader. Once the floss is in the threader, you can pull the floss through. When pulling the floss, hold the metal part. Use one hand to hold the needle and gently pull it through. Just pull it through. Now the threading is complete. Adjust the floss to make one side short and one side long. This is the short side. This is the long side. Then on the long side, we need to tie a knot. Let's finish explaining threading first. Next, we'll teach you how to tie a knot. This is 3 strands of embroidery floss. Let's take a look. Use this needle. This needle works the same way. First, pass the threader through. There are 2 ends. The smaller end is for medium-sized needles. The larger end is for the largest needles. Let's demonstrate using this metal threader. Start with the smaller part of the metal. Like this. The hooked part should face up, not down. Facing up makes it easier to operate. Then pass it through the needle. Place the floss on the hook. Like this. Then gently pull the metal piece through. This way, we've threaded the needle. One side is short, the other side is long. Now you've learned how to use the threader. You can also thread without using this tool. Let's see how to do it this way. When threading without a tool, how do we thread the needle? First, cut the floss end evenly with scissors. Then pinch the floss end. Then align the floss. Move it slightly. Thread it through like this. Pull the floss. It threads through easily. Next, I'll teach you how to tie a knot. There are several methods for tying a knot. The first and simplest method is to tie a simple overhand knot. This is the first method. Then take the floss end and pull it out from under the loop. Now a knot is tied. This way you can start embroidering. Then there's another method. Place the floss end on the left side of the needle. Hold the floss with your right hand. Wrap the floss around the needle twice. Then pull out the needle. Then pull the needle upward. You need to hold the floss end. The knot is now tied. This is the second method. We also have another method. Wrap the floss around your index finger. Twist it with your thumb. This creates a knot. This is the third method. All three methods work. Just use whichever you prefer. Now I'll teach you how to use different stitches for embroidery. Each floss consists of 6 strands. It's the same as what is mentioned on the cover about separating strands. For example, in this section, we use 1 strand of floss. Here, it's 1 strand of floss. So in this area, we use 1 strand of this color. Then we embroider it using the stem stitch. To separate strands, this is how we do it. Pull out 1 strand of floss. Just pull out 1 strand of floss. It may shift slightly as you pull. Pull 1 strand out like this. Now we've pulled out 1 strand. Tie a knot. Start embroidering from one end of this floss. We embroider from right to left. Take the first stitch. You don't need to pull the floss all the way through. Then, bring the needle out about halfway through the first stitch. Bring the needle out here. Then stitch forward 1 more time. Bring the needle out above this floss. When pulling the floss, keep it smooth. Keep the spacing between each stitch the same length. Follow the same method to embroider. Complete the line by stitching to the end. For the last stitch, bring the needle down at the end point. Now the line is complete. Let's tie a knot on the back. This is how it looks from the back. This spot is too close to the edge of the hoop, so it's hard to tie a knot. Let's add 2 more stitches. Then position the needle in the middle. This makes it easier to tie a knot. Bring the needle up and wrap the floss around it twice. 1 loop, 2 loops. Then pull out the needle. Cut off the floss end. Let's take a look. This is the finished effect. How to tie a knot on the back. Follow the demonstration from earlier. Here, we are using 3 strands of embroidery floss. At the end, remember to tie a knot. Stitch from right to left. While embroidering, your left hand can provide some assistance. Gently pull the floss. This will make pulling the needle through smoother. Now we're using 6 strands of floss. Use 6 strands to embroider this number 6. At the end point, bring the needle down. Now this part is complete. Let's take a look at the changes from 1 strand, 3 strands, to 6 strands. The changes in different strand counts. The floss transitions from thin to thick. Different strand counts. Create different effects. Now let's demonstrate the back stitch. How much floss should we use each time? Here, we are using the second one. This is color number 8. How much floss should we take each time? About 1 meter is enough. This length is just right. Start from one end of the line. Before starting, remember to tie a knot. Always remember to tie a knot before starting. Then begin. Bring the needle through. The first stitch is somewhat similar to the stem stitch. Take 1 stitch. Then move forward. The exit point for the needle should match the length of the previous stitch. Bring the needle through. Then go back. Return to the previous point and bring the needle down. Then move forward again. Bring the needle through. Go back and bring the needle down. Repeat this process continuously. Bring the needle through. Bring the needle down. Repeat these actions continuously. Each time you bring the needle through, make sure the stitch length stays consistent. This will make the lines smoother and more visually appealing. Once this is done, the embroidery is complete. Start from one end of the line and bring the needle through. Start here. First, take the first stitch. Then move forward and take another stitch. Return to the center point and bring the needle down. This completes the stitching. This is the demonstration of 2 strands, the effects of using 2 strands and 5 strands. Now let's continue with the satin stitch. The satin stitch is one of the most commonly used stitches. For the first stitch, divide the pattern into 2 halves. Then we start by stitching the left side. After completing the left side, we stitch the right side. Each stitch must be vertical. When bringing the needle down, make sure to place it on the lines of the pattern. Keep the stitches tightly aligned. This will prevent gaps. We'll now fill in the left half of the pattern completely. After completing the left side, move the needle to the right side. Follow the method on the left. Each stitch should be perpendicular to the pattern. If the stitches are crooked, the final result will not look good. For the last stitch, we have now completed it. A small heart shape. When tying a knot on the back, you can pass the floss through the inside first. Wrap the floss around the needle twice. All 3 of these are embroidered with 3 strands of floss. This side also uses 3 strands, just in different colors. Now we'll embroider this. This is also a satin stitch, but the shape is different. The embroidery method is the same. For the first stitch, divide the pattern into 2 halves. Divide the line in the middle into 2 halves. Then embroider the left side first, then the right side. The satin stitch is the simplest of all stitches, but it's also the most frequently used stitch, so this is a relatively easy stitch to learn. Because this pattern is non-removable, so we can try our best to add an extra stitch in this area. This will fully cover the entire pattern. Now we move the needle to the right side. At the end, remember to fully cover the entire pattern. Here we have 3 different colors. All are embroidered using 3 strands of floss. This stitch shows the effect of different colors. Now we'll demonstrate the woven rose stitch. We are using 6 strands of floss. The first step is to stitch these 5 base lines. Stitch the 5 base lines. According to the framework shown here, We'll set them up first. Bring the needle through. Bring the needle through at this position. You can do this in other places as well. For the first stitch, make a straight line, pointing to the center point. At a point near the center, bring the needle through. This is the first step. After setting up the 5 base lines, find a point near the center and bring the needle through. After bringing the needle through, skip one line, skip this line, then wrap around another base line and pass through. After passing through, skip one line again, then pass through another base line. Follow the same method as before. Skip one line and wrap around one line. Continue until all the straight lines are wrapped. Keep wrapping like this. When pulling the floss, be careful not to pull too tight. If it's too tight, the embroidered rows will not look good. It will appear overly compact. It won't have a full and plump appearance. So when pulling the floss, keep it smooth. Aim for a more natural look. The base lines are now almost completely wrapped. To check if it looks full, observe the outermost circle. If it's covered, that means it's complete. Right now, there's still a bit left. The edges are still slightly visible. So we'll continue wrapping a few more rounds. We can turn the needle around like this. When at the outermost part, our floss, when pulling it, should be kept loose and not too tight. This should be just about right. Now for the final stitch. Just like this, go downwards. Bring the needle down. And adjust it slightly. Use the needle to slightly adjust its shape. Now it's complete. We'll now demonstrate again. This is a rose stitch with French knots. Let's take a look at the effect. With added French knots. Similarly, we'll do the same now. We need to establish 5 base lines. But this time, they are not in the center. They are placed here, making the lines relatively shorter. After setting up these baselines, bring the needle through at a point closer to the baselines. Then wrap around one line. Then skip one line. The method is the same as before. It's just that when setting up these baselines, there are some slight differences. Then we continue wrapping in circles to form a triangular shape. When pulling the floss, keep it loose. Maintain a relaxed state for the floss. Do not pull the floss too tight. Wrap the floss fully around. The method for embroidering this is the same as the one on the left. You need to cover the outer contour line. When the contour line is fully covered, it means it's complete. For the final stitch, bring the needle down. Use the needle to slightly adjust the shape. Then use the same floss as before to embroider the center part. 6 strands of floss. Bring the needle through from the center position. Because the center is hollow, there is still some empty space here. Hold the floss with your left hand. Wrap the floss around the needle twice. Point to a spot around the center. Then pull the floss from underneath. When pulling the floss, do not pull it too tight. Let's demonstrate again. Use your left hand to assist and wrap twice. Do not pull too tight. If you pull too tight, the knot will disappear. Use the needle to slightly adjust its position. Now it's complete. Let's now demonstrate the running stitch. Next, we're demonstrating the fourth one. We need to take 4 strands of floss. The color is number 6. Start by bringing the needle through at one end of the floss. Then follow the pattern. Bring the needle down and then up again. This is a relatively simple stitch. This is stitched 1 stitch at a time. Then this is one method. Later, we'll teach you another stitching method that is continuous. For the running stitch, it's important to maintain floss tension. Do not pull it too tight. If it's too loose, it will puff up slightly. If it's too tight, it may wrinkle. So just maintain a balanced tension. This is the effect of stitching with 5 strands of floss. And we're using another method, a continuous stitching method. For the second stitch, bring the needle down and bring it up for the third stitch. This way, the stitches are connected. You can stitch about 2 to 3 stitches at a time. Since this area is close to the embroidery hoop, it's a bit tricky to operate. If we didn't have this, it would be easier to work with. This is the effect of continuous stitching. Next, let's demonstrate the French knot. 2 strands of floss, color number 8, will stitch from right to left as usual. Bring the needle through. The French knot is slightly more challenging. Use your left hand to assist by holding the floss. Wrap the floss around the needle twice. When bringing the needle down, point it to a spot near where the floss came out. Bring the needle down. Then gently pull the floss a little. But don't pull it too tight. Pull it gently like this. After pulling, use your hand to assist slightly here. Slowly pull the floss. The floss needs to be pulled all the way through. This ensures the knot sits flush against the fabric. After pulling, it will form a small knot. Once the small knot is formed, this is what the finished knot looks like. Next, we'll demonstrate the second one. Hold the floss with your left hand. Wrap it around the needle twice. Then bring the needle down. Pull the floss from underneath the fabric. Slowly pull the floss. Let's demonstrate again. Wrap it around the needle twice. The knot must sit flush against the fabric. Before pulling the floss, Don't pull the floss too tight. If it's too tight, the knot will become very small. Just make sure it's attached to the fabric. It doesn't need to be overly loose. Now we're using 5 strands of floss. 5 strands, color number 4. This shows the progression from small to large. This is the effect of using 5 strands. Similarly, we wrap the floss around twice. When pulling the floss, don't go too fast. Practicing this stitch is slightly more challenging than other stitches, so it requires more practice. Once you've mastered it, you'll find it very easy to work with. Now we've completed the effect with different strand counts. Now let's demonstrate the chain stitch. Here, we are using 2 strands of floss, color number 8. You can stitch from bottom to top or top to bottom. I'll start stitching from bottom to top. For the first stitch, bring the needle through. After bringing the needle through, insert the needle back at the same point where it came out. Then move up 1 stitch length. Bring the needle through again and hold the loop with your left hand. Pass the needle through the loop and pull the floss. This forms a chain-like shape. When inserting the needle, insert it again at the same point where the needle came out. Keep the spacing between each stitch consistent. With consistent spacing, the chain will look beautiful. The exit and entry points for the needle should always be the same. Pass the needle through the loop. For the final stitch, insert the needle back at the same point. Now the chain stitch is complete. Now we're using 5 strands of floss, color number 4. Each stitch will be demonstrated at least twice. Watch my steps closely. Move forward and take 1 stitch. Pass the loop through. After passing it through, pull the needle. This forms a small loop. Then insert the needle again. At the end, insert the needle back at the same point. The effect of using 2 strands to 6 strands looks like this. Now for the whipped back stitch. We're using 3 strands of floss, color number 9. We'll start with the back stitch. This is the same as the backstitch method we showed earlier. First, stitch 1 layer of backstitch. It's a variation based on the backstitch. Start with a backstitch. If you don't remember how to do the backstitch, you can watch again. For the backstitch, bring the needle forward. Then bring the needle back. And repeat this process continuously. Bring the needle through and bring it down. Remember to stitch along the lines. After completing the first layer of backstitch, bring the needle through at approximately the middle of a stitch. Bring the needle through. After bringing the needle through, pass it through the second stitch. Do not pass through the fabric, but pass through the floss above. Then connect each stitch together. Connect each stitch together. After wrapping, insert the needle back at the starting point. Then it's done. That completes it. Let's practice this stitch again. First, complete one layer of backstitch. Then bring the needle through at the middle of the first stitch. Wrap the floss around the second stitch below it. Then wrap the floss around each stitch below, in the same direction. Connect them together. Form a straight line. For the final stitch, insert the needle back at the starting point of the first stitch. Now it's complete. Next, we'll demonstrate the fishbone stitch. Using 3 strands of floss, for the first stitch, bring the needle through at the tip of the leaf. Stitch the first line down the center. This will be approximately this length. Make the first stitch and bring the needle down. Then, for the second stitch, bring the needle through above the first stitch. On the left side of the first stitch, bring the needle through at the upper left corner and bring it down at the lower right corner. For the third stitch, form a symmetrical shape that crosses like an X. This creates a symmetrical pattern, like this. For the fourth and fifth stitches, continue repeating the steps of the second and third stitches. Align them alternately. 1 stitch on the left, 1 stitch on the right. Continue stitching around the center line. As you continue stitching, make sure each floss is tightly aligned. This way, there will be no gaps. It will consistently form a crossed pattern. Keep stitching like this, following the pattern, and stitch down both sides. Continue until the entire leaf is filled. Now the leaf is fully embroidered. For the structure below, stitch upward again to add another stitch. Now it's complete. Use 6 strands of floss to embroider this leaf. Start by stitching a straight line in the center. Then stitch 1 on each side. Stitch another on the right side. Then repeat the steps from the previous stitches. The more strands you use, the embroidery will appear fuller and more solid. Make sure the edges are not visible. The entire edge line must be covered to achieve a more complete look. This shows the effect of using 2 to 6 strands. It starts finer and gradually becomes thicker. The overall texture and detail become more pronounced. When using 6 strands of floss, this is the fishbone stitch. Next, let's demonstrate the long and short stitch. For the first stitch, we are using 3 strands of floss. It can be a long stitch or a short stitch. Start with the first stitch. I'm stitching a long stitch now. On its left side, stitch a short stitch. Then, the same process applies. Divide the pattern into 2 parts. Stitch the left side first. After finishing the left side, stitch the right side. It alternates between long and short stitches. After stitching a long stitch, make a short stitch. For the edges, stitch close to the line. This makes the overall shape look more refined. After finishing the left side today, move the needle to the right side. Then stitch the right side. The first stitch on the right is a long stitch. The first stitch here is a short stitch. Then continue with a long stitch. Alternate between long and short stitches. After completing one row, proceed to the next layer, first layer, second layer, third layer. Continue stitching upward like this. Now we've completed it. We continue stitching from the short stitch. Then follow with a long stitch, then a short stitch, alternating long and short. The same pattern continues, one long, one short. Now we move on to the third layer. Complete the entire pattern. For the edges, adjust as needed to fill in the stitches. This ensures the overall shape looks full and smooth. Now we've completed the long and short stitch. After finishing this part, we'll demonstrate the next section. The first stitch is a long stitch, then a short stitch. Stitch the left side first, then the right side. Here, a faint line is visible, so we'll add another stitch. After finishing, move the needle to the right side. Now the floss is used up. We'll connect a new piece of floss. Since the floss is finished, because this floss has run out. When you've stitched halfway and the floss isn't enough, First tie a knot on the back. Then start a new piece of floss. Tie a knot at the end of the new floss. Then continue stitching from where you left off. You don't need to use the old floss to connect to the new one. Just tie a knot and start with a new piece of floss. Then the small design is complete. Next, use the same method to stitch the other side. Continue stitching. Remember to leave the small center circle empty for now. This is another stitch method, which is the French knot stitch, so we'll leave it unstitched for now. Then continue stitching the second layer. We've completed this part. At this position, you can add one more stitch. Then, we move the needle to the center position. This part uses the French knot stitch. We use the French knot stitch technique to fill this area completely. With the left hand holding the floss, wrap the floss twice around the needle at this distance. Remember not to pull the floss too tightly. Slowly pull the floss like this. Once filled, it's complete. That's it. This stitch is called the long and short stitch. We'll end the demonstration here. Now let's demonstrate this part. This section uses the back stitch. It is stitched using the back stitch on the right side. The floss is 6 strands, and the color is number 9. Bring the needle through. Since this floss is relatively thick, the stitch length can be slightly larger. Simply follow along the line to stitch. The method is the same as the back stitch we previously taught. The back stitch is the same. We start stitching the outline. From this point and stitch like this. Or start from here. Or start from this side. Stitching from either side is fine. Where to start is not defined or restricted. It depends on your personal preference. Then we move the needle to this position. Now we've finished this part. Next, we'll continue stitching the upper section. The same stitch is used here. It's the same stitch, but the number of strands is different. Here, we're using 2 strands of floss. No matter which stitch is used, we must ensure the stitch length is approximately the same. Avoid making one stitch long and another short. After finishing this section, do not end the floss. Move the needle to this central position. There's a small circle here to be stitched using the satin stitch. No matter the size of the pattern, the stitching method remains the same. We start with the first stitch, dividing the pattern in half. The stitching method remains the same. First, stitch the left side, then the right side, then it's finished. After we complete the stitching, it will look very smooth. When the fabric is stretched tightly, the stitching will lay flat. It won't wrinkle. Let's take a look at the effect. The second part. Next, we'll stitch this, the central design. We'll apply the stitches we just learned to this small design. Now we're preparing to stitch the large central mushroom using the long and short stitch. The color is number 5 with 3 strands of floss. Starting here, since there are repeated sections, we'll demonstrate only one part. However, every stitch will be demonstrated for you. Apply the previously learned stitches here. Start the first stitch in the center, the first stitch. Then the second stitch is a short stitch. We repeat the pattern, a long stitch followed by a short stitch. First, stitch the left side, then continue with the right side. After completing the first row, the first layer, move on to the second layer. If you prefer to start somewhere specific, such as stitching the mushroom first, or starting in this area, or stitching other sections first, the order of stitching is not fixed. It's all fine. You can start with any section first. However, the order of the stitches remains unchanged. After finishing the left side, the floss runs out, so we connect a new piece of floss. Tie a knot at the end of the new floss, then continue stitching from where you left off. Next, we continue stitching the second layer. After finishing the left side, move on to the right side. This section is now complete. After finishing, move the needle to this spot. Since it's the same color, there's no need to tie a knot. Simply move the needle to this area and stitch this part. The second mushroom also uses this color with 3 strands of floss. The stitching technique is the same for both. This stitch technique is the satin stitch. After finishing the left side, move the needle to the right side, then continue stitching the right side. Now we've finished the 3 mushrooms. Next, we'll stitch the white part of the mushroom. This section also uses the satin stitch. Follow its shape as you stitch. When arranging the floss, it can be slightly slanted. After finishing the left side, we'll stitch the right side. Using the same method, arrange the stitches slightly slanted. Tilted toward the center. Next, we stitch the middle part, using the long and short stitch. Now we've finished the middle section. Next, we'll continue stitching the left side. The top section is divided into two parts. There's a line here, separating it into upper and lower sections. Both upper and lower sections use the satin stitch. Next, the lower section is also stitched with the satin stitch. For this decorative area, use the French knot stitch. Note that 3 to 4 knots are fine. On the other side, there will be 3 knots. Then, move the needle to the top and continue stitching the larger French knots. Here, you can make 7 to 8 knots. It's quite flexible, adding decorative touches to this area. Now it's complete. For the daisy stitch, this stitch is introduced in S2. Use your hand to help open the loop. Bring the needle through at the end of the leaf. Insert the needle into the loop. After pulling the floss, insert the needle again at the end point. Insert the needle again at the end point. It's very similar to the chain stitch. Here, both of these areas. Use the satin stitch. We've finished stitching the white center part. Now let's demonstrate the leaf. Fishbone stitch. This stitch is the same fishbone stitch as before. For the first stitch, start with a straight line in the center. Then stitch both sides, crossing 2 lines alternately. Repeat the steps of the second and third stitches, arranging them alternately. Now we've finished stitching the leaf. Afterward, we'll finish stitching everything in this color at once. The stem stitch on the left side, these two are the same. Both use the same color, number 6, with 3 strands of floss. Now let's stitch the upper part of the mushroom. This uses the satin stitch. The center part involves a lot of satin stitching. For the mushroom, except for this part, all other areas use the same stitch. They all use satin stitch. We'll finish this section, along with the remaining small details. Then the entire piece will be complete. This area also uses the satin stitch. Using the same method, we'll stitch another mushroom. On top, we'll add a decorative line. Stitch a line between these two colors. This line is the stem stitch. Stem stitch. We're using the stem stitch in this section. It's the same stitch as we used earlier. Then tie a knot at the end. Now let's stitch this mushrooms. Decorative line on top. Using the stem stitch with one strand of floss, color number 10. Outline the shape using the stem stitch. Stitch a few decorative lines in the middle. You can pull the floss slightly to guide the direction. Then bring the needle down. After finishing the top, move the needle to the bottom. Stitch a decorative line. This line shouldn't be too long or too prominent. It should have a subtle effect. Just a few stitches as accents are enough. Move the needle to this side. If you want it to be more visible, don't pull the floss too tightly. Let it show clearly. That way, it will stand out more. That way, all the central designs is now complete. Now let's take a look at the overall effect. This is the completed result. Next, we'll look at How to handle the back. This is the front, and this is the back. First, take a pair of scissors. Cut off the excess fabric at about 4 centimeters, 1.5 in, from the edge of the embroidery hoop. Use a floss. 3 to 4 strands will work. Then tie a knot. After tying the knot, we'll make large running stitches like this. Wrap the floss around the edge. Gather the excess fabric inward. Pull it slightly tighter. Make sure the fabric stays taut. Before wrapping the floss, pull it tight first, then start wrapping. After wrapping, we can remove the needle and tie a knot. Hide the knot underneath. This way it won't be visible. Now it's done. We've completed the first step. We can also reinforce it further to make it more even. Using floss like this, you can make it tighter. This is also an option. If you don't want to do more, this is fine too. The back will still look neat. It's smooth and invisible. Both methods are fine. That's all for the back finishing method. With that, we've completed the entire tutorial.